Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be tier ranking every mammoth that I've ever read, or at least every mammoth that I have recorded as having read in the Storygraph. So we're going back at least like 4 or 5 years here. So let's talk about what I'm going to go over in this video. I'm going to share with you my tier ranking scale. We're going to go over all the books that I've read. I'm going to rank them all. I'm going to do some honorable mentions as well as some dishonorable mentions. And then at the very end, I'm going to sort of put together a like top tier must read before you die in order from least to greatest. I've done that a few times, but we'll see if doing it like this changes. I do want to say right off the bat that I am doing this independent of what I star rated these books. So let's start by talking about the tier ranking system that I'm going to use. Okay, so hopefully you can see it up on your screen, but here is my tier ranking system. The top place, the place that the books are going to go that I would actually reread before I die, is going to be the area of worth every page. These are the books that I would read again or would read for the first time. No, I definitely have had read them at least once. But these are books that if I reread them, I would reread every single page. Like I would not skip it. I would not go to an abridged version. I would not do audiobook. I would physically reread every single page of these books. I do also want to mention that I looked through, and the vast majority of the books that I'm going to mention today are books that I have actually physically read with my eyes. So there's only a few of them that I have used audiobooks for, and I'll mention which ones those are. And there's also a few books that I wish I had used an audiobook for, and we will definitely be talking about that. Level 2, so the books that are slightly below the first tier, are those that I questioned, does this come abridged? They're books that I liked and enjoyed and would even recommend, but in certain circumstances would recommend an abridged version, and certainly if I ever reread them, would probably only read the abridged editions. I will say for most books, I would say read the whole thing at least once, and then maybe after that, cut it down by hundreds of pages. The third tier goes to it better have an audiobook. There are definitely some books that are long that being able to get through it on double speed because the material is so light and easy to listen to or just entertaining are better as an audiobook, or they're so slow paced and so long that they leave you wishing there was an audiobook. The second to last tier is I'd rather be lifting weights. And these are for those books that are huge and heavy, and I could have just gotten a workout and been more satisfied. And finally, the bottom tier goes to all the books that I wished I had just used to keep the doors open. So books that would have been better as a doorstop. All right, that's it. Let's get into organizing these books and see what happens. I've put pictures of them up there. I haven't like really sorted them or thought about what categories I would put them in. So we're going to go through it and figure that out together. And you will notice that as I go through the list, I'm going to initially skip some of the books because I had to upload all the pictures, but some of them are honorable mentions and some of them are dishonorable ones. And like I said, we'll come back to that at the end. So the first book that I'm going to start with that I can see is 4321 by Paul Auster. I would say that this was worth every page. I have no doubt about that. Was it the most amazing story I've ever read in my life? No, but because of the way the book is constructed, I thought it was an excellent book, first and foremost, but I just don't think you would get the same effect of the entire story if it was in any way abridged. And I really liked the length. It didn't feel long, really. And yeah, I think it's worth every page. I think if you like semi-postmodern writing and you like stories about looking at people's lives from different angles, this is a book that's worth every page. Oh, and I should mention for these books exactly how many pages they would be. 4321 is one of the shorter books that I'm going to be mentioning. It is 866 pages long. Just a little bit shorter than that is Anna Karenina. Now, where would I put Anna Karenina? This is a tough one. Do I wish it was abridged? No. And I do want to reread it, and I would reread every page. This is by Leo Tolstoy. I feel like a lot of people want to try Tolstoy but are intimidated by Anna Karenina and War and Peace because they're both super long books. Anna Karenina is the shorter one of the two, and it's honestly the one that I would tell people that every time you read it to read every page because it's the more novel form of the two. It's the one that Tolstoy considered a novel. And so I just feel like there's a lot you would be missing about how he's building up the story if you read an abridged edition. And I do believe you can get it abridged. The next book I'm going to talk about is Arabian Nights. That was 1,008 pages. This is the Lyons translation that is put out by Penguin Classics. And this is, again, worth every page. I feel like I'm on a bit of a roll here, but trust me, it's going to roll downhill very shortly. So, Arabian Nights. Why would I recommend particularly this edition is worth every page? It's because there's so many stories involved in here. And we're talking about just volume one. It's 3 volumes that are all the Arabian Nights. But there are just so many stories and narratives embedded in other narratives that I do honestly feel like you need to read every single one to figure out which ones you like because it would vary so much from person to person. And I'm sorry if you can hear crinkling in the background. My son is eating out of the bag, and I might have to tell him to change to a bowl because it's annoying me. Anyway, Arabian Nights. Yeah, I would definitely say read the whole thing. If you want to try it, if you like short story collections, that's almost what this book is going to feel like. And they do have an index in the back that will help you sort of be able to figure out like where each story begins and ends so that you can read it and feel more like you're reading a short story collection. And I think that's a really easy way to approach the book and to try all the stories and not miss out on some that might surprise and delight you. All right, next we're going to move on to Charles Dickens' Bleak House. And Bleak House, oh gosh, that name is so fitting. It was bleak, and it felt bleak while I was reading it. Now, I know this is for some people their absolute favorite Charles Dickens, but for me, and I should say all of these are just my opinions. You can totally have different ones about all of these books. But for me, this book, I felt like it better have an audiobook, and it did. And in fact, I think towards the end or maybe even middle of the book, I started heavily using an audiobook. It was just too slow paced for me, even for a Charles Dickens. And I really didn't like the way the storylines were kind of coming together and where they were going. And I think it was also honestly just too bleak. It was also 939 pages, but I did have more of a mass market paperback size, so it might be closer to like somewhere in the 800s if you read it in that way. But the next book is nowhere close to that. At 1,474 pages, I read A Suitable Boy, and this is a book that I would say at the end of the day is worth every page. I have read this book twice now. And after the second time, I knew I didn't like it as much as I did the first time. And I thought that would mean that I might not even read it again and that I would be satisfied with that. But I read it a couple years ago and I still think about it every now and then. It is a family story set in India at the time where India has its own independence and it is trying to figure out what is going on and what it's going to look like as a country and how it's going to operate as a country and what is suitable in marriage and in life in general. And I just think of so many aspects of that story and compare other books to it. It's so well written, but it is slow paced. And I think that was the part of me that was like, I don't know if I could do this book again. But I did work through it. And I do really love the story and the families and everything that happens in it. And I can't imagine reading it abridged. And I do want to read it again. So there you go. The largest book on this list is Clarissa, which shouldn't surprise anybody if you followed me last year. 1,536 pages. And oh, I would love to say this is worth every page. There is an audiobook if you're interested. You can find one on LibriVox, and I think that one might be the unabridged edition, but this also comes abridged. And honestly, after this last reread, that's where I would put it. I would want to read an abridged book from this point on. I've read Clarissa twice. I've read the abridged edition once, and I enjoyed the refresher of it by going through the entire book last year. But after having done that, I've realized there really is a huge chunk of the book that can be really a drag and very repetitive and just a source of frustration, which I think you need to experience once in reading it, but not repeatedly. So from this point on, if I reread Clarissa, which I'd like to do one more time maybe, it would definitely be the abridged version. And now at 1,276 pages, we have The Count of Monte Cristo, which I feel like is the book that everybody is reading this year. And I have seen people who have finished it, who have been reading it, who are starting to read it. And one of the questions that comes up all the time, or two of the questions that come up all the time are, is there an audiobook? And how about the abridged edition? Is that okay to read? Of course it's okay to read. Read an abridged version if you want. However, this book is worth every page. And I think everyone who has read the entire book will tell you that. And especially if they've even looked at the abridged version, because the abridged version takes out so much of the intrigue and the mystery and the setup and the scheming that is such a huge, satisfying part of this book that you literally are missing out. You're not just missing pages, you are missing out. This is a book you should have FOMO about if you don't read the whole thing. Should you have FOMO if you don't read it? Probably, but that's on you. Decide for yourself. But yeah, if you don't read that entire book, every single page, you will miss out on the experience of it by reading an abridged version. At just a little 896 pages, we have David Copperfield, my much beloved book. If you've watched my channel before, you will know I think this book is worth every single page. I've read it once. I have plans to reread it again this year, and I can't wait. I loved this book. It was really hard for me to get into, and the first time I attempted it, I actually needed to use an audiobook for the first couple of pages or chapters to get used to Charles Dickens' writing style. And then once I did that, I just took off. I loved it. When I went back and tried it a second time, and I said I only read it once, but what happened is I tried it the first time, used an audiobook to help, DNF'd it because I was struggling and realized it just wasn't the right time to read it. And so I put it down, and then I picked it up a second time and read the whole thing. And I'm so glad I did. It was worth every page. It was worth any struggle. I can't wait to reread this book. Highly recommend. Greatest coming of age story that I think I've read up to this point. Even though I've read a couple and I love them all, that one is still my favorite. And then there's Don Quixote. I feel like of the classics, this is the book that I most frequently hear people ask, like, does this come abridged? Is the abridged version okay? And I feel like, unlike The Count of Monte Cristo, this is one that a lot of people say, yeah, do the abridged version. And you know what? I would have to jump on that bandwagon and say the same thing. I really enjoy Don Quixote. I'm glad that I've read the entire book twice. I really liked the translation that I read in last time, which was Edith Grossman's. I have other editions of it that I would like to try in different translations or by different translators. However, I'm recognizing the problem or the resistance that people have towards the second part of the book. And while I still enjoyed it, part one of the book and part two of the book do feel very different for a lot of reasons. And if you watch my reading wrap up, which I'll link in the description box below, where I talk about my thoughts on Don Quixote, I share why part one and two are different. And because of that, I think that you actually gain a lot in doing an abridged version because I think it helps those two feel more connected. So my plans for the future of Don Quixote are to read abridged editions. Not really, because the other translations I have are unabridged. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I have The Eighth Life up next. This is 944 pages long and is historical fiction. So this is a book that is set in Georgia. It is about a family of chocolate makers. Everything about the description of this book sounded like something I would really love. And at the end of the day, oh, where would I say? It felt too long. So it definitely wasn't worth every page. I did listen to it as an audiobook. But honestly, when I think about this book, I feel like I'd rather be lifting weights. I just feel like the story didn't go where I wanted it to or where I felt like it said it was going to go. It focused and slowed the pacing down on things that I wasn't as interested in. And I could have thought of better uses of my time. It wasn't a bad book. It was just too long. The audiobook didn't help enough. And yeah, I don't know. That's just where it lands for me. So far, though, I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like this is looking like most of these Mammoth books are worth every page, which is good. That's what we want, right? We'll see how long that continues. But Amber is the next book I'm going to talk about. And this is 972 pages, and the whole title is actually Forever Amber. I've mentioned this book a lot. It's another work of historical fiction slash romance slash contemporary nonsense. It was a fun book that drove me insane. Absolutely insane. Now, that said, where would this fit? I don't feel like it needed an audiobook. This actually moved along and was paced really well. Would it have been better if it was abridged? Possibly. Possibly. Would I have liked it better if it was abridged? No. It was the character. The character drove me crazy. The character growth and the character like arc was really more like a flat line. And it didn't feel like bad writing or bad characterization. Like it felt intentional. Like the author wanted to drive you crazy. And she did. She drove me insane with that character. Is it worth every page? I don't know about that. I'm gonna say, does it come abridged? Would I read it if it came abridged? Would I rather have lifted weights? Where do I really? I mean, it's not a doorstop. I can eliminate that. Would an audiobook have made it better? I'm gonna move this, guys. For me personally, I would have rather lifted weights. Yeah, I'd just rather get a good workout in. I kind of want that time back, but it's not a doorstop. Like some people will like this book, and I totally get it. It was just me and her. We didn't get along. Okay, moving on. The Tale of Genji, 1,360 pages. I have also read this book multiple times in its entirety. And is it worth every page? Ooh, that's a tough one. I would say, does it come abridged? I feel like this is definitely one of those books where you should probably read it in its entirety once, but then I think there are things that you probably wouldn't miss if you abridged it slightly. I think a reread, this would hold up really well to an abridged edition. Do I plan on reading it again in its full length? Yes, because the translations of this book are very different. And so I want to experience every part of the book in full translation. That said, once I've accomplished that goal, I would probably only reread it as an abridged book. Even then, when I reread it in different translations, I may only go back and read my favorite parts of it in other translations. So I may self-abridge the book, though you can get this abridged. Gone with the Wind. Lots of people's favorites, 1,037 pages. I feel like this is one of those mammoth books that a lot of people have read and still want to read. And for me, I'm not going to lie, I think it's better as a doorstop. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people think this is a great book. I don't for a lot of reasons. I've talked about it multiple times before. I will put another YouTuber, their video about this book in the description box below. I have all the same problems with the book that they did. I just think it's a problematic book. And if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend it just so that you can see why some people have issues with the book. And you might find that you would too, and maybe save yourself a read and, gain a doorstop in the meantime. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I never remember. I read Piranesi and loved it and thought, oh my gosh, Susanna Clarke has written an even longer book. This is very different than Piranesi, first and foremost. It is a bit of magical realism, I think, more than fantasy and historical fiction set in Napoleonic War times. And it felt long. It wasn't worth every page for me. I don't think an audiobook would have helped. I honestly did not enjoy this book. And I was surprised. I thought I would love it. I thought there were parts that were okay. It was well written, but it was also really boring for a lot of the book. And I realized that I really liked Piranesi for Piranesi, and that I just don't know that I'm going to love everything that Susanna Clarke puts out. She puts out a lot of different types of books, and that's good for her as an author, and that one just wasn't one for me. And Les Mis. I haven't reread this book in a while, and I probably will at some point, but I do know what bothered me about it, which is I really felt like there were parts that needed to be abridged. Victor Hugo, I have since learned, is like the master champion, loves a good digression, and I really don't. I really don't like digressions and storylines or tangents, or when, like, it's not even like he's using it as a plot device. It's more like there's something tangential to the storyline that he wanted to talk about, and he decides to insert in the middle of his book regardless of everything else and how long it takes. And he will spend every single last page talking about that subject he wants to talk about. And then he will, in a literal tangent, find that one point to connect it back to his story and move on. And it drove me crazy. And I refuse to do that to myself ever again. So if I ever reread Les Mis, I would read it in an abridged version. I think there's a lot of people out there who would tell you you're not missing that much if you do that and never read the full length novel. But give it a try. If you don't mind digressions, there's a lot of them in there for you. The Mysteries of Paris. Oh, I dragged somebody else into reading this with me. Sorry, not sorry, Stormy. It was a lot of fun. Okay. We both did not think this book was worth every page. Not only did it go on and also have a lot of digressions because it did inspire Les Mis, if you didn't know that. So if you love Les Mis, give this book a try. Um, but even in a abridged edition, I feel like the writing just wasn't really great. It was like pretty simple and almost ridiculous at times. I really don't think that was just the translation. I really think some of that just had to do with Eugene Sue. So, yeah, it would have been fun as an audiobook. I would say that. I don't know that you can find one. I think you can find parts of ones, maybe abridged versions of ones. That might be a really good way to do this book. And if I ever listened to it again, that's probably how I would do it. Well, then I have Nicholas Nickleby, another Charles Dickens. I liked this one, not as much as David Copperfield. I don't even think I'd say it was worth every page. I don't think it comes abridged, but it definitely could have been cut down and made shorter. I really did like it though, and if I reread it and couldn't find an abridged edition, which I don't know that I'd look for, I would look for it in a longer edition, but like I said, to me, it wasn't worth every single page. And another Charles Dickens is Our Mutual Friend. I read this. I know some people love this. I have realized that I really don't like the darker side of Charles Dickens. And for me, this one fell so low that I'd rather just get a good workout in. Like I would have rather spent my time lifting the book and working out with it than actually reading it. It's not a bad book by any means, and I totally get people who love it. It just wasn't for me. Next up, I have Stalingrad, and this was a surprise read for me last year. And not only is there an audiobook for this, but it was a book that I wouldn't want abridged. And honestly, I was traveling at the end of reading this book and had to switch to audiobook, and that made me sad because I felt like I was missing sentences or words because I was driving and couldn't hear sometimes and got distracted. This book is worth every single page, and I'm so mad that I missed some of them. So much so that I'm hoping to read book 2 in this series, Life and Fate, sometime this year. And even though I don't have to, I'm tempted to go and read the last 200 pages of Stalingrad because that was the part I ended up having to listen to on audiobook. And yeah, it's so good that I would just reread that short section because I think I've been forgetting to tell you how long these books are. Stalingrad is 1,088 pages. Anyway, I would reread the last 200 pages just to make up for the fact that I might have missed something, even though I looked up a plot explanation at the end of the book just to make sure I caught everything. I still want to physically read it with my own eyeballs. Eyeballs. Why did I say that so weird? Okay, next I have Trinity. I feel like other than during March of the Mammoths, this book doesn't come up that frequently because it's a mammoth that I read before I started my channel. And this is a really good book. It's set in Ireland and I forget the exact time period it takes place during. I will put that up on the screen, but it is such a well-paced, action-packed, sad, devastating story with good characterization. Unlike a lot of Mammoths, it's not a slow-paced book, and it is more of an action-based book that I think would make it easy for a lot of people to get into. And there's so much important information that is shared in this work of historical fiction that it is no doubt worth every single page. My one and only sci-fi on this list, I think, is XX. And that's kind of surprising because there are some long sci-fi out there, but this is the one that I read. It's 992 pages and it surprised the pants off of me. I really enjoyed this book. It has so much visual stuff going on the page. The author is actually a graphic designer and that shows up, and it's worth every page. It's worth all the sentences, all the pictures, all the fonts, everything. It's a hard book to get a hold of, but if you like books that are about potential first contacts, if you like science fiction, if you like hard sci-fi and books that make you think, and you like books that are ergodic fiction, where they're playing around with like formatting and different ways of telling and showing stories, this is the book for you. Read it, read it, read it, and don't skip any of it. Okay, I think I'm missing one book that I've actually read, and if so, I will correct that when we get to the end and I'll let you know which one it is. But we're now going to move into the honorable mentions. But first, I would like to say how pleased I am to see that most of the mammoths I'm reading are worth my time, and that more, way more than half of them are at least worth trying once. So I feel like that's good. That's success. That's like what you would want to have as a lover of really big books. And it's a question that I get asked a lot, like, is this book worth it? Because it's just going to go on and on. And you can see that top row. All right, let's go into honorable mentions. Like I was saying, for my honorable mentions, I'm doing books that are 700 pages, that maybe there's some editions where they're 800 pages, but they're books that are really long and so close to being mammoths that I thought they were worth mentioning. And these are books that I read, and I've basically just picked out one for each category, more or less so. So they're not all the books that I've read that are over 700 pages long, but like I said, I just picked out one for each category that I felt like best represented each of the categories. So we're going to go from, well, let me not tell you. Let me just show you where they end up being. So I'm going to start with the first one that I see here, which is Drood, which is one of my most anticipated reads during one of my years. It is a book that is about Charles Dickens and his writing in late in life. It's a fictional work, and it is told by Wilkie Collins, and it is a weird sort of gory horror novel, and it is set during Victorian times, and the style of the writing is so good. The warning, don't read this book if you actually want to continue to like these two authors, because it's also revealing about some of their like interior lives. It's almost as like horrifying as reading a memoir of an author, an autobiography or biography, and finding out that you like their art but maybe not the people. It's that kind of deal. So Drood, all that saying, as great a book as it was one that felt too long, and I would definitely be like, does that come abridged? Because it should. It definitely should. There are definitely times where I felt like the author was just sharing information just because he had researched the information and now wanted to share it, and like it needed to be cut back for sure. Another honorable mention that is definitely worth every single page is Fane. However, it is in the 700s and like the low 700s, if I recall correctly. So technically, it didn't make the cutoff, but it should, guys. It should. It was so good. I read it at the very end of last year, beginning of this year. How am I already forgetting? But yeah, 5 stars, highly recommend. Historical fiction, Victorian period, reminds me a lot of Fingersmith in the way that it's looking at women during that time period, and it will keep you going from page to page. It's another really long book that I would say is like medium to fast paced, and that helps a lot. All right, I'm going to talk about The Goldfinch. This is a book that I know some people are going to disagree, but for me, it would have been better as an audiobook. I honestly thought it was too slow paced. I thought the pacing was off and it kind of dragged at times. I would have liked it to be abridged and to be shorter. And I honestly only made it through because I eventually listened to the audiobook, I think. And in fact, I almost want to say I listened to half the book as an audiobook. I hope it's actually an audiobook. If not, like, I'm really questioning my own brain and its ability to remember anything. Anyway, look for the audiobook. That would be my recommendation. Oh, and I see a missed book, War and Peace. This is a book that, yeah, it's going to go right there. Does it come abridged? Yes, it does. Should you read it abridged? After having read it once, for sure. The tricky thing about War and Peace is not only does the story alternate between wartime and peacetime and those lines get blended, but even Tolstoy himself did not actually consider this a novel, and that is sometimes a difficult thing for people to wrap their mind around, because the book is going to start out and it's going to feel like a novel, but then you're going to have what feels like essays sprinkled in it throughout, and those get longer and longer and longer. My recommendation, if you're going to start with this book instead of Anna Karenina, is I would definitely read the whole thing once, straight through, because it's War and Peace. And if you don't do that, you're not really getting the book as it was intended. But if you go back and you read an abridged edition or you abridge it yourself by sticking to the narrative parts, I'm not going to blame you for it because I'm probably going to do that myself from this point forward. And I'm just going to, I've read it twice. So at this point, if I read it again, I'm only going to read those sort of Leo Tolstoy philosophical essays when I feel like it. Okay, the last book that I have to mention regarding honorable mentions, going back to that, is The Sword of Shannara. Again, these aren't all books that I loved. They're just books in the 700-page realm that I wanted to mention. And if you didn't catch on, they were getting progressively worse. This is the one that, personally, I feel like would have been better as a doorstop. This book is high fantasy, modeled after Lord of the Rings, to the point of where it felt like plagiarism. It definitely wasn't as good, though I could definitely see people's arguments that it was more approachable and accessible than Lord of the Rings, which I would agree. And so, some people would be like, oh, it's a great warm up to Lord of the Rings. It probably was at the time that it came out. Since then, I think there's way better books. Now, I have heard as you continue on in the series that it gets more unique, but book one was so bad, you couldn't convince me to continue on in this series. There were times where I listened to this book as audiobook as well as physically read it, and I would listen to the audiobook while I was walking because I would walk out from my house into this loop and couldn't end my walk until I got home. And so it would force me to listen to the audiobook and make my way through. Why did I do that instead of DNFing it? I don't know. But anyway, I continued the audiobook that way. Part of my walk, a good like 5-10 minutes of it, was spent walking next to traffic. And so even with the audiobook turned all the way up, I couldn't actually hear it. And I was okay with that. That was probably the best part of the walk. And I found that I never missed whatever those 10 minutes of the story was. I still was able to pick up right where it left off and still didn't care. And I think the other thing I didn't like about this book was the ending. The ending of this book is literally the biggest cliche about found family, and I just couldn't. It just put the nail in the coffin for me. So I wish I had used the book as a doorstop instead of read it, but that's just me. Mileage may vary. All right, and that brings me to my dishonorable mentions, which you can probably see there if my head's not blocking the way, but let's get going with those. These are all books that I DNF'd. Now, normally I wouldn't talk about books that I've DNF'd, but the reason I'm going to do so this time is because for each and every single one of these books, I actually read more than 50% of the books before DNFing them, which in a Mammoth book means that I read probably 400 or 500 pages out of these books before I put them down for very different reasons. They're probably going to land all over the place on here. Clearly, none of them are worth every page, but all of them are over 800 pages long. So let me start with 1Q84. This was a book that I had heard good things about. It was my second Murakami. I was looking forward to it. I love the way this book feels in my hand. This is the edition of it that I have. It was not worth every page. It would have been better if it was abridged. An audiobook for this would probably work because then you would hear maybe all the music references and that would have been cool. But honestly, this book for me could have just been a doorstop. It wasn't the writing, it was the characterization of the women, their motivations, the way they talked about themselves, the way they wanted people to look at them, the way they were just treated in the book, the way the men treated them and saw them. It was just ick all around, and I would not read it again. And sorry, my page keeps moving around, but as I drag the books over, that just keeps happening. Anyway, moving on. And Ladies of the Club. Oh, yeah. Oh gosh, this is another one that's better as a doorstop. Don't worry, they're not all doorstops, but this one was. This is one where I think I had 200 pages left of this 900 some odd page book or something like that, and I could not force myself to finish. It was boring. It was slow. It is supposed to be about like small town in the Midwest during sort of the Victorian period and just how, how wonderful these places were in this time and place. It was written in the 80s. By the way, the 1980s, like not the 1880s. And, definitely supposed to be like, oh, this was such a charming time. Shouldn't we go back to it? No, nothing in this story made me want to go back to that time period. Not me personally, not for me, not for you, not for anyone. This town was full of just women that I would not want as neighbors for a variety of different reasons. Like each person had a different reason I would not want them living in my neighborhood. Not Mr. Rogers fans here. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. It's historical fiction. Some people have read it recently and probably like it. It has good reviews on the review sites, but yeah, no. And then we have Little Dorrit. Oh, Charles Dickens, you're breaking my heart. It's not a doorstop. Um, I don't know. It just dragged on and on, guys. I tried the audiobook and honestly, I would have rather done anything else. Forget lifting weights. Like you name it, probably would have rather done it. And in fact, I tried doing things while listening to the audiobook. And after a while, I just realized I didn't care. I wasn't listening. It was pretty obvious where the book was going, which is quite frequently the case in Charles Dickens. But in this case, like I didn't care for it to get there. I was like, okay, whatever. Yeah, foreshadow and tell me what's going to happen at the end so I can stop reading. And then one day I realized, oops, I had. I literally just had stopped reading the book. I had stopped reading it. I had stopped listening to it. It wasn't the book that I lost last year. I lost a book while I was in the middle of reading it, but it could have been that book because I don't know. I just put it down somewhere and just never picked it up again. And then eventually went, I should stop saying I'm currently reading this on the story graph because I'm not. Sorry. And then we have the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. This is probably the one that's the highest up. And it's probably the book on here that's the hardest for me to rank. I would say, even though I DNF'd this book, that it's probably worth every page. It was so well written. It was such an interesting story. It was so well paced. But for me, the content of it was just too heavy. So this is the case of a book that I would say check the content warnings. And if it has content in there that is written about at length and repeatedly that you think you could handle, give it a try because I think you will find that it's worth every page. For me, it wasn't, but because of the content, not because I wished it was shorter or abridged. And it's not even a book that I would say I wish you would like cut the content out of. Like, leave it in there. Somebody needs that story, and hopefully it would help them. So that is it, guys. That is the whole thing. That is my set of books. That is my tier ranking of all my mammoths. I also told you that I was going to rank the top row. So let's do that real quickly because I was definitely about to wrap up this video. But let me do that real quickly and put them in order from favorite to like least favorite. I think like the top and bottom of this worth every page are probably pretty obvious just from what I said as I was going along. David Copperfield, he's always going to be the first. Well, will he always? I don't know if he always will be. Wow, why did that put him last? Rude. But yeah, he's the first in my opinion. Okay, you know what? 4, 3, 2, 1, you gotta move over. Um, but yeah, I don't know if he'll always be the first, but he's always been the first for now. And I think the love songs is appropriate where it is for all the reasons that I said. Now comes the tough part. What would number 2 be? So those are all good. Those are my top 11. That's the final thing. I'm going to stop touching it or I'm just going to fiddle it to death. Anyway, those are my top mammoths for 2026. There's tier ranked everything that I have read, most of which I've read and reviewed on my channel. So you should be able to search these books by names and it should come up with the video where I did a book review or included them in my weekly wrap up, that kind of thing. And yeah, that's it for today. And I'll talk to you next time.